And is in Israel at this hour. People are gathering at memorials to commemorate 2 years since the October 7th attack by Hamas that killed 1,200 people. And at the same time, U.S.-led peace talks are currently underway. President Trump says he believes a deal is close. Cecile Shea, a non-resident fellow with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, joins us now. Cecile, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So let's start with the negotiations here. Hamas says they won't disarm. And of course, that seems to be a major sticking point for Israel. So knowing this, do you think there's still potential for a deal?
There is more potential for a deal right now than there has been probably for the last year or so. But you're right. It's going to be very difficult. There is so much anger on both sides. So many lives have been lost, particularly on the Palestinian side. There's not a lot of leadership left on the Palestinian side. Everyone thought the sticking point would be how far Hamas would demand that the Israelis pull back during this first phase of the ceasefire, and that's still going to be a significant issue. In terms of Hamas disarming, I don't think that's probably necessarily possible during the first part of the ceasefire. Perhaps they will consider a commitment to doing so in the future, but they have to save face too. I do think that Hamas in particular realizes that this is their last chance. And I believe President Trump when he says this is their last chance. And I also know that the Palestinian people are putting whatever pressure they can on Hamas to strike a deal, although it's difficult. It's not a democracy there, obviously. So I can't say I can't say I'm even remotely optimistic. I can only say I'm a little more optimistic than I've been in the last year, mainly because President Trump's son-in-law is involved and is pushing President Trump to really try to pressure both sides to come to a deal. And I think that President Trump is doing that, and I give him credit for laying down the law to both sides at this point.
Cecile, I did mention how many Israelis were lost during that October 7th attack 2 years ago today. But I didn't mention that the Palestinian Authority is reporting that more than 60,000 Palestinians have lost their lives. Of course, that agency controlled by Hamas, so unsure if we're getting clear numbers there. But what could Palestinian territory look like within Israel if a deal is made, do you think?
So in the short term, there's going to be, I think I was on your show quite a bit 2 years ago, and what everyone was talking about at the time was the need for the Gulf states to come in and support a new Palestinian government, something that is not the Palestinian Authority and not Hamas. And that is exactly what is in this deal. It's a shame it's taken so many lives lost and so much ruin over 2 years to come to this point. But, it looks like what President Trump is pushing for is an interim government to be propped up by some of the wealthy Gulf states to set up some less corrupt, hopefully more democratic institutions, both in the West Bank and Gaza. Now, Gaza is going to look like Gaza. I mean, despite what President Trump thinks and despite what some Israelis think, even Ariel Sharon knew that Israel was not going to ever take back any part of Gaza. Gaza will stay Gaza. The big question is how much of the West Bank is Israel at this point willing to pull out of? And that has a lot of religious overtones. And, I once asked an Irish friend of mine if he was optimistic or pessimistic about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he reminded me that Ireland and Great Britain have been at it for 700 years, and neither of them thinks that God gave them the land. So it really is the West Bank is going to be a more difficult thing. And I'm kind of punting on your question. I do think the only answer is a Palestinian state. I do think it will include Gaza. But how much of the West Bank it's going to include, that's going to be a really difficult thing to hash out in the future.
What is your understanding of the status of the hostages taken by Hamas at this point?
So there have been some articles this week, first-person stories by released hostages that are, just heartbreaking, and just their own ability to survive in those conditions is astounding. So Israel apparently believes that 20 or 30 hostages are still alive. They would obviously be malnourished, as are the Palestinian people. The hostages are in worse shape than most Palestinians, but let's not forget that the Palestinian people, particularly their children, are also suffering. So everybody, all the innocent people, including the hostages and the Palestinian civilians, they need this to end. but about 20 or 30 of the hostages are still alive. If Israel goes in with another ground attack, none of them will survive. That's really clear. So there's a lot of pressure on Netanyahu right now from both the released hostages and from the families of the survivors, and from for the families of the hostages whose remains have not been returned. And that could be like 50 people. 50 people may have died in captivity, beyond the remains that have already been released. So, yeah, time is running out for them, and time is running out for Gazans. So we need a solution to this, now, and certainly before the weather starts getting a little cooler in the wintertime.
All right, Cecile Shea, thank you so much.
Thank you.